Hello and welcome to another Real Talk podcast presented by Duval County Public Schools. I'm one of your hosts, Matt Biegun.
And I'm Vickie.
And today we're going to talk about an interesting topic that's come up a lot, and that is Common Core. And who better to talk about this topic with than the Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Nikolai Vitti. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
For a lot of people, Common Core is pretty abstract. We don't really know what it is. There's also a lot of misinformation out there. So our first question, the most basic one, what is Common Core?
So Common Core is, we first talk about standards. So usually you hear Common Core standards. And standards are what teachers teach and what students are expected to learn. Every grade level and subject area have standards. And so right now, teachers teach to what we call the next generation of Sunshine State standards. Those are Florida standards. And like I said earlier, the easiest way to think of standards is what do we expect teachers to teach and students to know at the end of the year. And so standards have always been defined, for the most part, at the state level. So in our country, we have really 50 different sets of standards. They're more similar than different, but they are different based on what that state designed as its standards. So Common Core standards is the initiative to have the same standards mainly in reading and math right now, across the entire country, so that every state, every city, every district would be teaching the same standards from kindergarten to 12th grade, focusing mainly in reading and math. And the idea behind these Common Core standards is that first of all, we are one of the only industrialized countries in the world that don't have national standards. Most industrialized countries have national standards. So no matter where you're going to school, you're exposed to the same information, and you're expected to know the same information. One of the benefits of Common Core standards is that we don't have lower or different expectations for our children depending on what community they grow up in, depending on zip code or city or state. And the one concern that educators have across the country is that depending on the state that you grow up in, you may be exposed to higher level standards or higher expectations of what kids should learn as opposed to being in another state or in another city. So ultimately, our kids adapt to the expectations that adults have for them with the right kind of support and encouraging. Those students usually will meet our expectations, usually. And so the argument is we're having kids being exposed to an education that may not be as rigorous in one city or one state as another, and this will equalize that. So a lot of this conversation is about equity and access, so that whether you're growing up in the urban core or in a rural part of the country, you're still exposed to the same information, and you're expected to know the same thing at the end of that year or at the end of taking that subject area. This is also relevant because our children and our families are moving much more from state to state, city to city than they ever have before. And what we're seeing, for instance, we've had thousands of new students come to Duval County Public Schools this year. They're not all coming from Jacksonville. Some have left private schools to come back to public schools or going to public schools, but many are coming from different cities and states. If they're coming from Florida, that's fine because they've been exposed to the same state standards. But if they're coming from Georgia or Mississippi, what they have been learning may be completely different than what they're learning now. So what we also are trying to do nationally is create an educational system that if you're in Mobile, Alabama, and you and your family has an opportunity of finding a better job or jobs, let's say in New York City, you're going into New York City just building off of what you're leaving. So it's a seamless integration process when it comes to exposure of the standards.
Now, if the Common Core initiative is such a national thing going on right now, why do you think locally we're seeing some pushback?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think historically when we talk about public education in the United States, it's been a local process. That's why we have local school boards and decisions regarding curriculum and the standards have usually been a local decision. in a local process, because the feeling was, well, at the local level, you know best regarding what the kids should be exposed to, and you don't want to lose the local history and the flavor of the educational process. But the reality is not only is education and the need for education become much beyond a local I think, issue, but we're talking internationally now. Our kids are not only competing with the kids that they grow up with in their neighborhood or in their classroom, but they're competing with kids throughout the state. They're competing with kids in private schools, but competing with kids across multiple states, but most importantly, internationally. Our kids today are not, when they leave high school and they leave college, are not just competing with their classmates or kids throughout the country, but with kids from countries in Asia, in Eastern Europe, in Africa, and that's why we have to make sure that our kids are exposed to the right type of information and the right type of expectations all the way through. So some of the pushback is the fear that we're losing local control for a national movement. The reality is that the Common Core standards have been developed by states. A consortium of states have worked together to create the curriculum. This is not something where a group of federal bureaucrats from the US DOE are sitting in a room and creating these standards. This has been a very state-driven process with multiple states working together in order to create the standards. It has not been driven, it's been initiated by the federal government in order to make us more competitive internationally and to make sure that we have equity and access across our country. But the actual development of the standards have been more of a state-driven process than anything federal.
That makes sense. And I guess to further clarify some more confusion that we're hearing a lot about, there are Common Core standards and then there are Common Core assessments. And there seems to be some debate around the assessments. Can you kind of clarify what that's about?
Sure. So anytime you're talking about standards, you eventually should be talking about assessments. And you want the assessments to be aligned to the standards. So in other words, if you're talking about first grade, at the end of that first grade year, you want children to know certain things. That's based on what the standards are. The assessments determine whether kids truly understood those standards. So the conversation now is we should have national standards, so all states, all districts are teaching to the same standards, and then you have more of a national assessment that is aligned to those standards. Now, what has happened even before the recent decision by the governor to pull out of Park, which was an assessment that would then test the new national standards in Florida, was that multiple states would work together regionally to develop the assessment aligned to the standards. So the standards would be the same across the board, but there would be a consortium of states that would participate in the assessment. So it would be Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Arkansas, and a group of states that would work together. So the assessment would be aligned to the standards, but it wouldn't be the same test across the country. That's not what we were talking about necessarily. We're talking about regionally having a similar assessment. And the benefit of that and why I believe I think I talked through why I believe in national standards. But why do I believe in national assessments is that, again, this conversation about us being an international competitor now, and we have to compete internationally. But on a national level, I think it's helpful to know how do the kids in Jacksonville compare to the kids in New York City or Charlotte or Atlanta or Detroit, and not from a competitive point of view, but at the national level. If you're looking to really help kids, then you need to know where kids aren't learning. And it's really hard to determine what kids aren't learning when every state has its own assessment, because then you're comparing apples to oranges and not apples to apples. So one opportunity is to properly invest and provide additional resources for districts or pockets of kids that are struggling. It also gives us the opportunity to learn from districts that are really showing some positive improvement. So if everyone is teaching to the same standards, which they would under the Common Core standards, and multiple states are participating in the assessment, then let's say Atlanta. If Atlanta has outstanding progress in reading, then it's an opportunity for large districts to go to Atlanta and see what they're doing so that we can replicate that and do that here with our kids. So that's the opportunity. The other thing, very specifically in Jacksonville, is that because we've had the Next Generation Sunshine State Standards and FCAT, and we have been, when even before the national, there was a conversation about Common Core standards. There was a process to evaluate the quality of state standards throughout the country. And when they did that, Florida ranked very high regarding the quality of its standards. So our kids in Jacksonville and throughout Florida are more ready for national standards than the typical state. So the opportunity, I think, for us in Jacksonville is if we had national standards and a national assessment, I think our kids are going to demonstrate everything that they know. And they know much more because they've been better prepared. Our teachers are better prepared. Our principals are better prepared. And certainly our students are as compared to the average state across the country, which means that when our kids take a national assessment, I think people will say, wow, you guys are doing some dynamic things in Jacksonville. What are you doing? That would be great for our city. I think it'll finally it'll make our city recognize that we have a very good public school system. And I think it will be very good for industry and the opportunity for us to recruit businesses. So when businesses are saying, should we invest in New Mexico? Should we go to New Rock in Arkansas? Should we go to New York City? Part of that conversation will be, well, how are kids doing? Are we going to a place where our employees will be prepared and be employable? And I think that's a way for us to retain the companies that are here and recruit companies long term. So there's silver lining to, I think, a national assessment for us in Jacksonville because of what we've had to do in Florida to better prepare our kids for the post-secondary work that they'll be involved in. But I think a way to showcase our good work here in Jacksonville regarding public education.
Now, Common Core is way too big of an initiative to just have popped up out of the blue. How long has this project? How long has it been around, and where does Florida fit in that timeline? Of are we kind of in the middle? Did we get on? Did we jump on early? Or where are we at?
Yeah, so really, the Common Core assessments have been an ongoing debate for years. But Florida and other states moved to agreeing to implement Common Core standards about 4 years ago, and so. We knew we were headed in this direction, but there just wasn't a lot of conversation about it. So just like anything, you can talk long-term about implementing something, but usually right up until the point you're doing it, people don't really start to pay attention. And so in Florida, we had committed, the legislature had committed years ago to implementing the Common Core standards when it decided to receive Race to the Top dollars. So part of the conditions to receive Race to the Top dollars, which were federal dollars, to do things like train teachers on the Common Core standards, principals, to invest in more technology. There were many different requirements in the Race to the Top application. One of them was to implement Common Core by 14-15. But with that came additional dollars to help schools and to help kids and help principals and teachers. And that's how Duval has been implementing the Race to the Top dollars, but that's how the state has been implementing those dollars. So this isn't something new, but because we're at the brink of implementation, I think the conversation and analysis has picked up.
And you definitely have groups of people who are either for it or against it. And we know the PTA has thrown its support behind the Common Core. The communications department has disseminated information online. So has the state of Florida. So just based on what you know, I think it's pretty obvious at this point. But why do you think people should or maybe should not support Common Core?
Well, I think they should support Common Core only because it means that I think it strengthens the concept of equity and access of high-level expectations for all children throughout our country. And to me, this issue is not just a Jacksonville issue; it's a national issue for all children throughout our country. And I think as a country, we have to we only benefit as a collective group when all of our children throughout the country are better taught and better prepared and have access to higher level standards. So all of our children will benefit for that, not only Jacksonville, but throughout the country. And we do have to strengthen our public school system across the country because we know that this is an international type of competitive process now. I'd also say that we should support Common Core standards because it allows us eventually, I believe, to showcase the good work that's happened in Jacksonville over the years. And so in a lot of ways, Jacksonville has gotten a bad rep regarding the quality of public education sometimes because we've only been looking at ourselves and sometimes St. John's and surrounding counties that don't look like us as far as they don't teach the same child on average that we teach. And so if we move to national standards and a national assessment, I think we're going to be able to compare ourselves with districts that are more like us, so large urban districts or large semi-urban rural districts, which we are in Duval. And I think we will be pleasantly surprised at how well we compare to large urban districts throughout the country. So I think those are all benefits. As far as against Common Core standards, the only reason why I would be against Common Core standards and assessments is because I always say the devil's in the details, and it's about implementation. And it's not going to be easy to transition to the Common Core standards because it's just change. And change is never easy. You got to buy new curriculum. You have to revamp your training. There's going to be an adjustment regarding how kids performed on FCAT and how they'll perform on this standard, and we might see a decline because the standards are harder and the tests are harder, and people sometimes don't understand that, and then they'll think that our kids are learning less than they were before. Those are the reasons why I am sometimes cautiously optimistic, if you will, about it, or concerned, maybe to be direct, about Common Core, but that doesn't mean I don't support it. Those are just some of the realities and pitfalls that come along with a new initiative. I'd also like to speak to, quickly, what are maybe a little bit better about what are the benefits of Common Core standards for students. So Common Core standards for me, and I would say teachers, is it's all about higher level thinking and higher level application. A lot of what we've done in FCAT is basic skills type of teaching and standards. We did change our standards to the next generation Sunshine State standards, which were better. But what the Common Core standards do is that they force kids to think and apply what they're learning. It's not memorization. It's not regurgitating information, but it's applying that information. And I think we want kids, and I've been saying this, to be able to critically think, to analyze, synthesize information, and that will happen more with the Common Core standards as opposed to the other standards. It's not a silver bullet, but the exams themselves will force kids to apply information, which teachers obviously want children to do better on the assessments. It's beneficial to them. It's part of their evaluation. But then they want their children obviously to be better thinkers and to know the information that they're being taught better. And I think that comes by having children apply what they learn, not just give back, recall type of information. And so I think in the end it'll make kids better thinkers. And remember the information more because they have to apply it. That won't be easy for children, and it won't be easy for teachers, but ultimately I think both will be better served because of it. And I think it gives teachers the opportunity to do more of the application inquiry based that they want to do that sometimes they don't feel that they can because it's not aligned to FCAT. But again, there's going to have to be training and scaffolding to arrive to that point.
Now, you briefly mentioned FCAT. With Common Core, what becomes of the FCAT?
So right now, we are required to implement Common Core standards next year, 14-15. And the question right now is what those assessments look like. And that's the governor decided to pull out of PARC as the assessment that we would use. And right now,
what's PARC?
Yeah, so PARC is just the acronym that is used for the name of the test that would be aligned to the Common Core standards.
Okay.
And so the governor said, I don't want to use PARC So let's open up the invitation to compete for the assessment. So that's opened up again, and now it might be Park, it might be another assessment, and but hopefully still aligned, obviously, to the Common Core standards. Now, hopefully that process happens quickly, and that's a concern I have, is can we develop an assessment in enough time to implement at the end of 14-15? That remains to be seen. I'm hopeful that will happen. But if that happens, we won't have FCAT any longer, because FCAT is based on the Sunshine State standards, the Florida standards, and you never use a test that's not aligned to what you're teaching. So we would no longer have FCAT, and we would have some assessment that is in some name that will be aligned to the Common Core standards. I'm also a bit critical on this fact is if we're going to have national assessments, the Common Core assessment or standards, I think we need Common Core assessments, meaning we shouldn't have a national standards process and not have a national assessment process. And that's what worries me right now. There's talk of having national standards, but having a Florida-based test. And that to me contradicts the process and the thinking behind having national standards. And so I've been pushing to say I'm all for the national standards, I'm all for Common Core standards, but I also want national assessments because the opportunity is to compete against multiple states and to showcase the work that we've had in Jacksonville. I don't want FCAT 3.0, which is really another version of a Florida assessment aligned to new standards. That, to me, I think dilutes the reason why we need Common Core standards.
I mean, the only way to find out how everybody is doing across the board is to make the same test for everybody.
Correct, and to do the right intervention, to learn from states that are or cities that are really moving the needle with student achievement isn't possible. The other thing, and I didn't speak about this earlier, but I don't know if people really understand this. Right now, at the end of the year, we all open up the newspapers to see how our kids did across the district, right on FCAT. And then we see 60% of our kids are reading at proficiency level, let's say district-wide. Now, that same process happens throughout the country because No Child Left Behind required all states to have an assessment system and to link it especially to reading and math. The problem is that every district or every city that opens up the newspaper after test scores are released are looking at results from a different test and from different expectations on the test. So in Florida, let's say, for example, you have to answer 8 out of 10 questions to be at grade level. Okay, in Mobile, Alabama, you may only have to answer 5 out of 10 questions to be proficient. There's no standardization throughout the country. Not only that, but the test that the kids take in Florida, that you have to get 8 out of 10 right to be at grade level, could be harder than the test that you take in Mobile, Alabama, that you only need to get 5 out of 10 questions right. And so part of this conversation is, again, having a calibration of high expectations regarding what kids should know and learn and demonstrate. And that's not the case throughout the country. And we send the mixed messages and the wrong messages to our community when we say 60% of kids are reading here, but then in Mobile, Alabama, it's 80. Well, 80%. Well, no, it's not, because it's not the same assessment, and you're not defining that proficiency the same way. That's what I believe is the opportunity with national with assessments, so we can finally compare, not to beat up one city and highlight another, but to know where kids are learning so we can replicate those practices across our country so all kids are learning at a higher level.
I agree.
Some interesting information you bring up. We really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us about Common Core, and we just want to throw in one more question about our next episode with you, and I think that will fall around your 1-year anniversary of being the superintendent. I know you've remained quite busy this entire time. Does it really feel like a year?
It depends. It depends on the day and the situation I'm dealing with. There are moments when it feels like 10 years, and then there are moments like it feels like a month or a week. It just seems like yesterday that I started and I had my first day. In fact, I remember being in an office with you on my first day.
I do remember that.
And in some ways that feels like it was yesterday. But again, depending on the issue in the day, it depends. But overall, I really love my job. I love it more today than I did when I started. And there's not a day that I regret taking on this challenge. And I feel like the city has embraced me, and I feel as if we're making positive change.
Oh yeah, we enjoy having you here.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Real Talk Podcast. I'm Matt Biegun.
And I'm Vickie Pierre.
And thanks for listening, and be sure to tune in next month when we talk to Dr. Vitti about his 1-year anniversary.